you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm Chiara De Biase from Prostate Cancer UK, and I have the unenviable task of trying not to repeat what my peers have just gone through, so I will try and highlight the difference. So in February 2022, Prostate Cancer UK partnered with NHS England to deliver a nationwide campaign to find the 14,000 men in England whose prostate cancer had gone undiagnosed because of the pandemic. These men had stayed at home, protected the NHS, and as Peter just said, not had the opportunity to have those opportunistic conversations with their GP about prostate cancer or about the PSA blood test. So in case we needed reminding, Joanna's just displayed this and described it beautifully, but the represents the very familiar now 2-week weight drop-off and the slow, very non-linear recovery. From an NHS England perspective, we also knew that prostate cancer made up roughly 1/3 of all the missing cancer treatments in those difficult early recovery months, and it became clear that we could only shift the dial in prostate cancer through this very planned strategic partnership between ourselves and with NHS England. So how did it come about? I joined Prostate Cancer UK in September 2021, and one of my very early, very fortunate induction meetings was with the awareness team at NHS England. Long story short, they had a small underspend in their awareness budget, and I had a really interesting way that we could spend it. So we held the firm stance, as Peter's just alluded to as well, that prostate cancer is different. It doesn't fit with the usual NHS England awareness campaign, the symptom-led campaign, don't ignore the signs, etc. And that we needed to have something that was bespoke and that was something different. And the campaign was simple. A message to high-risk men to use the Prostate Cancer UK Risk Checker. For those that don't know, it's a 30-second digital tool that asks three simple questions. And the rationale behind it really is just to raise awareness of risk and the very difficult thing for us to translate to the general public about not waiting for signs and symptoms. From a campaign perspective, we had the assets from other work that were easy to repurpose and reuse, which saved time. And we had the risk checker up and running, so we could move quite quickly. We set out some very simple KPIs. We wanted all men over 45 to, about 92%, of all men over 45 to see the campaign. In terms of frequency, which we do through our marketing partners, that those men would see the campaign on average 11 times during the 6-week period. And in terms of risk checker completions, we modelled based on previous campaigns that we'd funded, 118,000 risk checkers was our aim. So once we finally had ministerial sign-off from, it was at the time, Sajid Javid, it was all systems go. So as you can see, we launched on Thursday the 17th of February. It was multi-channel, which basically just means we were on TV, radio, out of home, so bus stops and billboards, etc. And on the press and on digital social media, sorry. We did some regional targeting based on areas with the biggest gaps in referral and treatment data, which at the time, as we've discussed this morning already, the Midlands, the North East, Liverpool, Manchester, South East, London. And we heavily upweighted our activity around with the 1 in 4 message as opposed to the 1 in 8 message around big black populations across the UK, such as in South East London and in the North West. Prostate Cancer UK also put in a further £92,000 of our own charity money to ensure that this campaign was seen by men in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So even though the funding came very much around NHS England, it was our responsibility to push that message and that campaign into the devolved nations. So what did it look like? We've seen a glimpse from Peter's slide. I have a bit of a delay in my slide. There we go. So here's a little glimpse of what it looked like. So as I said, we launched on the morning of the 17th with an appearance on BBC Breakfast, and I think it's fair to say that the scale of the coverage and the impact none of us had quite predicted, or certainly not very accurately predicted. Where we had a piece of press which included one of our spokespeople, we had 383 pieces of coverage with a combined reach of 154 million people. Across other channels, we generated over 850 items of coverage, and on the first day alone on social media, we reached just short of 3 million people, thanks to celebrity support from Danny Willett, Ray Winston, Bill Turnbull, Stephen Fry, and at the time, the Health Secretary. We also had a huge spread across the press, Times, Mirror, Northern Echo, Yorkshire Post, over 380 online and regional titles. So the impact was huge. Sorry about my peculiar animations over there. So did it work? So in terms of KPIs, actually, absolutely. We met our target of 95% coverage. In terms of frequency, we actually believe that men over 45 saw the campaign an average of 14.5 times in 6 weeks. In terms of risk checkers, so if I just remind you, we'd modelled 118,000 risk checkers over 6 weeks. We had over 118,000 risk checkers by the time we all went to bed on the very first day of the campaign. By the end of the 6 weeks, over 500,000 people had completed the Prostate Cancer UK risk checker, 550,000 to be precise, and had completed all 3 questions and had carried out at least another action in terms of understanding and developing an informed choice about what their options were based on the risk. And we now hope that those people have a better understanding of the risk of prostate cancer. Average traffic to our Prostate Cancer UK homepage is in between 10 and 12,000 hits a day. On the very first day of the campaign, we had 52,000 hits, and that homepage had obviously been completely modified for the duration of the campaign in terms of being heavily around risk awareness. Our nurses, our specialist nurse helpline, usually takes about 200 calls a week. The first week of the campaign, we had 480. The second week of the campaign, just short of 400 still. And the third week, still 350 calls. So a real sustained impact in terms of people seeing the campaign in the public, not just on that initial first week. So the immediate impact was incredible, but more importantly, and we have covered a little bit this morning with the previous speakers, what does it mean for the campaign in terms of what difference does it make to men? So in terms of the 2-week wait, you can see that blue line, and that's what Peter has described in terms of that huge peak in March. It was the highest number of referrals ever, 28% higher than the highest pre-pandemic record. That impact has actually been sustained with the most recent available data to us showing there was a further 25,000 urological referrals in November 2022, which is still 32% higher than the average 6 months prior to the pandemic. And Peter's shown this slide as well, around 31 days. And what we can see is that anticipated lag around men seeing the campaign in February, making an appointment to see their GP, which we know is incredibly difficult at the moment, and then actually going into the treatment pathway. And Peter, I was delighted to hear your update because as of December, and I quote, this is from NHS England, progress has continued to be made in the prostate treatment gap. And at the time it was 2,382, but I'm going to go with almost 4,000. I'm going to take that as a quote, Peter. I think that's incredible. And that figure in terms of how we can align them with the impact of the campaign, NHS England used that looking at treatment above and beyond the 2019 benchmark. So is it 14,000 missing men? No. And its job still not done. We realise that. But just as an example, we had a campaign a couple of weeks ago around the North-South divide from the National Prostate Cancer Audit, and the impact of that again was huge. Part of my remit for the next year at Prostate Cancer UK is very much around reaching and activating more men to understand their risk of prostate cancer. So we realise its job not quite done. One of the really interesting facts, and we haven't been able to pull prostate-specific data out, which is a bit challenging when we're trying to look at the impact. This is one of the early conversion rates. So we came under a bit of flack, actually, perception that we were being reckless by doing such a huge campaign, that this idea that we were pushing men into having PSA blood tests, screening via the back door, that absolutely wasn't the intention of the campaign. What we can see in between February and May is we actually made the pathway more efficient, or rather, we were targeting, when we target men at highest risk, actually the right men seek support and seek treatment and have PSA. So more men were actually going from having a 2-week wait referral to identifying clinically significant prostate cancer. So shifting that conversion rate up to over 18%. So we know that targeted awareness works. And if I may, I'd just like to tell you about Ted. Ted is a gentleman in the pale blue shirt. He got in touch with us in the early summer to say that he'd seen myself and Joe, who's the black man on the sofa there with us. He shared his story on the first day of the launch, and Ted did the risk checker that day. He made an appointment to go and see his GP. Ted is 52. He went to see his GP a couple of weeks later, and 2 PSAs later was diagnosed with prostate cancer, Gleason 9. And he did get in touch to say he'd like to share his story, but he didn't want us to use his photograph. He never liked seeing himself. So fast forward to when Ted actually joined us on the red sofa to share his story incredibly bravely. But this was the real world impact. And I can also say that we've had a huge number of men get in touch, proactively get in touch to say that they've seen the campaign and have had a clinically significant diagnosis. All of these men were asymptomatic. So I just really like this as a real world impact rather than graphs in terms of what we can see. So just to finish, the success of the campaign was incredibly far-reaching, both in its achievements, but also on the platform it's given us, Prostate Cancer UK, as an organisation to get prostate cancer in front of millions and millions of the highest risk men that have still not been given their diagnosis on the back of the pandemic. Most recently, a couple of weeks ago, as we've said, we had no idea that North-South Divide campaign, where we shared the National Prostate Cancer Audit details, would blow up in quite such a way. But I think that is testament to the goodwill and the good work that came from our partnership with NHS England. I'm incredibly proud to lead this team and the work that we do, so I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much indeed.